In this part, we will talk about input and output redirections. So first, let's talk about the standard output, or STDOUT. So this is the output produced by a command when it is operating correctly. So for example, if I type ls, this is operating correctly, so it produced some result. And that result is displayed on the standard output. So this standard output by default appears in the same window as where the command is executed. So on this terminal or window or screen, right? But we can actually redirect this standard output so that the output goes to a file instead of the screen, right? And the way to do this is just to use an arrow like this, and then we specify the name of the file that we want, for example, out.txt. So here you see that the result of the ls command has not been displayed to the screen, but it has been redirected to this file, right? So when you use this, you are redirecting the standard output to this file. So we see that there is a file which has been created, and if we check the content of this file, you see that it contains the output of the ls command, right? And we can basically redirect the standard output of any command to a file. So for example, if I execute this command, so echo line 1, for example, and then I redirect this. So this command allows me just to display line 1 to the screen. By default, the standard output is your terminal, the screen. But I want to redirect this output to the file. So let's use the same file as the previous one, right? So now if we check the content of the file, we see that it contains the result of this command, okay? And the previous content of the file has been overwritten, right? So it is replaced now with the result of this command. So if you use this single arrow like this, let me do that again. So for example, new line 1, and I redirect this using a single arrow to this file, then you see that the previous content has been replaced with the new content, right? But it is possible to preserve the content of an existing file by appending to it or adding to it. And the way to do this is to use a double arrow. So if I do this, for example, new line 2, and then I use double arrow here, this will actually preserve the previous content of this file. So if the file out.txt exists, it will not be overwritten. We will add the new result at the end of the file, right? So if I do this, then you'll see that we are appending the new results to the end of the file, right? So we can do any other command. So for example, print working directory, and we redirect this result using double arrow to this file. So now let's check the content of the file. You see that the result of pwd has been added to this file. So we append to the file instead of overwriting it. But if I do, for example, let's say just some command like date, and then I use a single arrow, then this will overwrite the previous content of the file, okay? So if I just type ls, for example, this command operates correctly. It just displays the content of my current directory, so it displays this on the standard output. But if I do, for example, let's say ls, and then let me just try to list the content of some directory that does not exist. Let me call it fake. So there is no such directory in my home directory. There is no folder called fake. So this command should produce an error, right? So this error is displayed on the standard error, not the standard output. It is the standard error. And by default, again, the standard error is also your screen or the terminal in which the command has been executed. But we can actually also redirect the standard error to go to a file, right? So the output of this command, instead of being displayed to the screen, we can redirect it to go to a file using this. So to and then arrow. So this is used to redirect only the standard error to a file. And let's call this file error.txt. So you see that the error has not been displayed to the screen. It has been redirected to this file. So if we check the content of the file, you see that it contains the error. Okay. Now we may also have a command that produces a normal output, right, to the standard output, and also an error to the standard error. So for example, let me do the same thing here. So ls fake. So fake does not exist. So this should produce an error. But I also want to display the content of some directory that exists. For example, documents. Documents exists. So this command here have two kind of outputs: a normal output to the standard output and some error which is displayed in the standard error, right? So if I redirect only the standard output to a file, let me call it out.txt again, then this will actually only redirect the normal output, the successful output, to this file, right? The error is still displayed in the screen, right? So the normal output has been redirected to this file, but the error, the standard error, has not been redirected. And if I use this, this allows us to only redirect the standard error. So if I do this, the normal output or the successful output will be printed to the screen, right? By default, this is the standard output. But the standard error will be redirected to this file because we use this kind of redirection. And this kind of redirection only redirects the standard error, right? So if I do this, you see that the normal output has been displayed on the screen, but the error itself has not been displayed to the screen. It has been redirected to this file, right? As we can see here. And if we don't redirect anything, then both the error, the standard error, and the standard output, by default, they are your screen, right? And if we want to redirect both the errors and the normal output to the file, so if I want to redirect both the standard error and the standard output to the same file, then we can use this kind of redirection, this symbol here, right? So let me call it, for example, all.txt, all the kinds of outputs. So nothing has been displayed to the screen, and if we check the content of this file, you see that it contains both the error and the successful output, the normal output. Now, if we want to add something to this file which already exists without overwriting it, then again we use this kind of redirection, but with a double arrow, as you can see here, right? So if I have some command, for example, let's use the same exact command. Maybe I will just change the name of this one. So if we check the content of this file, we see that it has not been overwritten, right? So the previous content is still there, and we added the new content, right? The result of this command. Same thing if you want to redirect only the errors. So let me try to display Let me try to list the content of some directory that does not exist. Let me just call it no such dir, no such directory. It does not exist. And I want to redirect, I want also to display the content of documents, let's say, but I want only to redirect the error, the standard error. I want to redirect it to this file. And this file exists, right? If I do this like that, it will be overwritten, so we lose the previous content. If you don't want to lose the previous content, we use double arrow. So here we are redirecting only the errors, right? Only the standard error. But since we use double arrow here, we are not overwriting the previous content, right? So what happens here is that the successful output corresponding to this directory will be displayed to the screen, and only the errors will be redirected to this file, right? And the file will not be overwritten because we use double arrow. So let's check this. Yeah, so we see that this error has been added to this file, right? So to summarize, we can use the single arrow to redirect the standard output. If we don't want to overwrite the file, we can use double arrow, right, to redirect the standard output. If we just want to redirect the errors, only the errors, then we use this kind of symbol. So two arrow, right? Two and then arrow. So we want to redirect only the error to a file or the standard error. If we don't want to overwrite the file, then we can use double arrow like this with it too. So this will redirect only the errors without overwriting the file, right? If we want to redirect both the standard outputs and the standard error, then we use this, right? This symbol. And if you don't want again to overwrite the file, we want to append to it, then use double arrow here, okay? Now, what if we have a command that produces both errors and the normal output, right? Successful output, but we want to redirect the errors to a file and the normal output to another file. So for example, if I try to list the content of a directory that does not exist, for example, /fake, this directory does not exist on my system, so this will produce an error. And I also want to display the content of a directory that exists, for example, that one, right? So this will produce some successful output, a normal output, right? But here I want to redirect the normal output to a file and the errors to another file, right? So the way to do this is to redirect the standard output to a file. Let's call it example.txt. This is the normal output. And we redirect the standard error to another file. Let's call it error.txt, right? So what happens here is that nothing has been displayed to the screen, right? Instead, the normal output has been redirected to this file and the error has been redirected to this file. So let's check the content here. Yeah, this is the content of the /etc/ppp directory. This is the standard output, the normal output, and then here we have the error corresponding to listing the content of this directory, which does not exist. So this is kind of how you can isolate the normal output from the errors. Okay, so something also that I wanted to show is something called the null device. So this is kind of a file which actually does not save any content. So let me try to display the content of this one. So there is a file in /dev/null, this one, which actually does not contain anything, right? It's a very special file. It is also known as the bit bucket. Okay. So if I try to write something to this file, so for example, echo hello world, And instead of displaying this to the screen, I want to redirect it to this file. So dev null. Well, nothing has been displayed to the screen, so it seems that the redirection worked. But if you check the content of this file, you'll see that it still doesn't contain anything, right? So this is some kind of black hole file where anything which is redirected to this, it will disappear forever, okay? So even if I have some kind of errors like this, and then some kind of normal output like this, and I want to redirect everything to the same file, let's say all the errors and the normal output, I want to redirect them to this null device, then nothing will be displayed to the screen and everything disappears. Nothing has been saved into this file, right? So if you don't want to save to display something to the screen, you want to redirect it to some file, and you don't want to save it in a file either. You just want to get rid of it. You don't want to display it to the screen. So one way to do this is just to redirect it to this null device, right? So for example, if I have some command that produces some errors, right? And I don't want to display the errors in the screen, right? I just want to display the successful output. And I don't want to save the errors to a file either, because maybe I don't need this, right? So one way to do this is just to redirect the errors using this to this null device. So you will get rid of the errors. They will not be saved anywhere, and they will not be displayed to the screen, right? The only thing which will be displayed is the normal output, okay? One scenario where this is useful is maybe, for example, with the find command. So there is a command called find that allows you to find, for example, a file by its name, right? So if we want to find within the /etc directory and its subdirectories, what we want to find is, for example, all the files that have any name that ends with .crt, for example, right? So this will find starting the search from this directory, it will find all the file names which has .crt at the end of their name, right? So if I do this, then yeah, it will display that um, it has found this file, so /etc, and then we have this file which ends with .crt, right? So that's fine. But it also displays some errors. For example, I don't have the permission to access this folder, right? So find cannot access this folder in order to search. So it displays permission denied. The same thing for this folder, right? So if, for example, I don't want to display all those errors to my screen because I don't need them, I don't want to see permission denied everywhere, right? I just want to display the files that it finds, right? The normal output, not the errors. In this case, you just redirect the errors to, you can redirect them to a file if you want, but if you don't need those errors, you don't need to save them in a file, you can just redirect them to the null device, right? So only the normal output will be displayed, or the standard output is shown here in our screen, but the errors has been redirected to this device, and they are not saved in this device, right? So whatever you redirect to this file will disappear forever. And you can do much more stuff. For example, if I want to get rid of the errors like this, but I want to redirect the standard output to a file, right? Findings.txt, for example, then I can do this. So here it will redirect only the errors to this file. So we are getting rid of all the errors. They are not displayed and they are not saved anywhere. But we want to save the standard output, the normal output, to this file, right? So nothing will be displayed to the screen, but we have this file which contains the file names, or the path to the file names that the find command found. Okay, so that's it about redirecting the standard output and the standard error. Let's see now, let's talk a little bit about the standard input. And the standard input is normally provided by the keyboard. So by default, it's just the keyboard. So any command will by default take its input from your keyboard, right? So if you don't specify any file where the command can read from, then this command will by default consider that the standard input is your keyboard, right? For example, you remember the cat command, right? So let me first check what files I have here. Yeah. So I have a file called notes.txt, okay? So if you use the cat command and you give it as an argument notes.txt, then what this cat command does is that it reads from this file, right? And then it displays the content of the file to the standard output, which is the screen. But the standard input, in that case, we are telling the cat command that the input should come from this file, right? Because we gave it as an argument here. So what cat does is that it reads from this file and then it displays the content to the screen. So for some commands like this cat command, if you don't specify a file name as an argument, if you do just cat like this without specifying any argument, then they will revert to using the standard input to get data, right? So if I don't give it any file, then from where cat will read? Well, it will read from your keyboard. So whatever I write here, for example, hello using my keyboard, hello world, like this, it will display it for me. So whatever it reads from the keyboard, it will be displayed, right? So if I type, for example, how are you? It will be displayed, right? Goodbye, it will be displayed, okay? So let me press Control D to stop this. So here, when we specified an argument to the cat command, cat knows that it needs to get its input from this file, right? But here, since we didn't specify any argument, then cat by default will use the standard input, which is your keyboard, to read data, right? So basically doing this is actually the same as doing this kind of redirection. This is not the arrow we saw previously to redirect the standard output. No, this is different, right? So this is used to redirect the standard input. So we are saying that this input goes to cat. So the arrow has this direction here, right? So we are redirecting the standard input to come from this file instead of your keyboard. So the input to this command comes from this file instead of the keyboard. So this is the same as this, right? So it will just read from this file, and then whatever it reads will be displayed, right? That's what cat does. But now if I do the same thing, but with the inverse arrow, if I do this, what happens? So here we didn't specify any argument for cat. So by default, cat will read from your keyboard, right? So the input will be just the standard input, right? The keyboard. And whatever this command reads from your keyboard, we are redirecting it. So this arrow is what we saw earlier, right? So this one allows you to redirect the standard output. Whatever this command reads, it will be redirected to this file, right? So if I execute this, whatever I write here, so hello, will be redirected to this file. So the command is now reading from my keyboard. If I type, how is it going, for example, it is reading from my keyboard, and then it is redirecting this to this file, right? It is redirecting the output, not to my screen as in here, but it is redirecting it to this file, right? So if I type goodbye, and then Control D to stop this, if we check the content of this file, yeah, it contains everything that I typed here, right? So this is some kind of very simplified text editor where whatever you write using your keyboard will be actually written to a file and saved into a file, right? This is what I'm reading from my keyboard. Now, if we check this, it will be saved to a file, okay? And if I use the double arrows here, so whatever I write will be appended to the file. So if I just write this, then it will be appended to this file. So that's what you need to know about input and output redirections. Now you can redirect the output of any command or combination of commands to a file. So for example, if I have, let's use pipelines, for example. So if I have, let's say, the result of ls, my home directory is this one. And if I want to use pipes to grep only those files from the result of ls, and I want to grep only the files that ends with .txt, right? So you get only those files, and I want to count how many such files we have. So here the result of ls goes to grep.txt, which will filter this result and only pick the files that ends with .txt or that contains .txt. And then we want to give this result to the command wc in order to count how many of such lines we have. So we are just counting how many files in my home directory contains .txt. So we have 8. And instead of displaying this to the screen, I want all the result of this pipeline to go to a file. So let's call it count.txt. And I can use double arrows here just in case this file already exists. I just don't want to overwrite it. And if it doesn't exist, it will be created. So nothing has been displayed to the screen, but if we check the content of this file, it contains the result. And here we have 9 instead of 8 because at this stage, the file count.txt that we created here didn't exist at this stage. But here it has been created, so it is counted. It is first created, so it is counted as part of this pipeline. So we have 9, right? So now if I repeat this, it will display 9, not 8, right? And we are not overwriting the content of count, so it contains whatever we add to it. So that's it about input and output redirections.